I'm going to talk to you about the LLS Celator partnership, which really it's a real success story about how targeted funding can make a real difference and bring drugs to patients sooner. So VYEOS, we believe, is going to establish a new foundation of care for AML, particularly for high-risk AML, patients that typically don't do well with conventional therapies, and that's a large portion of AML patients. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, there hasn't been anything new for these patients for 40 years. It's a devastating disease. We need to change that. And we've been fortunate enough to make a good dent, and we're on our way to making those types of improvements with VYEOS. What we recognized was a problem that was underappreciated. So when you get a chemotherapy cocktail, like I said, the 7-3 regimen, the drugs are being given in what we call a cocktail. They're dissolved in water and they're administered into your vein, and they go throughout your blood circulation. And the two drugs go independently. They distribute to different tissues, different organs. They get excreted at different rates. So if it turns out that the ratio is important, I can't control that ratio. I can't ensure that the right ratio gets to the leukemia cells. And what we found out for these two drugs, cytarabine and daunorubicin, the standard of care drugs, the ratio is really important. A 5-to-1 molar ratio, 5 of cytarabine to every 1 molecule of daunorubicin, is optimal. It has the most synergy. 1 + 1 is 4. If I have too much daunorubicin, it's no longer synergistic. In fact, it's antagonistic. 1 + 1 = 0.8. So if I can't control the ratios in a cocktail, what am I going to do? Well, we applied nanotechnology. We use these nanomedicines, nanoparticles that are about 100 times smaller than a red blood cell. And we encapsulate the drugs in those nanomedicines at the right ratio. It's like basically like a Trojan horse. We have 5 cytarabine for every 1 daunorubicin, and they're called liposomes. They circulate through the bloodstream and they accumulate in the bone marrow. And that's where the leukemia cells are growing, and they accumulate and are taken up by the leukemia cells there. So in that way, we're getting the right ratio to those leukemia cells. The phase 1 trial, we had very exciting preclinical data. I'm not going to show you that tonight, but we had really great results. We were taking a drug, in some of our leukemia models, the drugs in their conventional form basically did nothing to extend the survival, but we were getting 100% cures. That's mice. What happens in people? So the first stage was this phase 1 trial, and here is being described as CPX-351. What we were able to do is demonstrate that the drug was safe, the side effect profile was tolerable, and we were seeing some very exciting evidence of anti-leukemia activity in patients that typically wouldn't be expected to do so well. Older patients where the gene makeup of the leukemia cells is very poor. It means that they're resistant to chemotherapy, and we were getting complete remissions. So now we had turned the dream into hope. I really think that this might have some promise. The challenge then is to turn hope into reality. And what that means is you have to do larger trials. You have to do the tough experiments, which means I'm going to go head-to-head against the same 2 drugs that are in VYEOS in the standard of care. I'm going to go head-to-head and see how I'm doing. And if it doesn't work, I'm not here tonight, and patients aren't going to benefit. But it's funding those type of studies where the LLS really made a difference. And it made a difference because in these 2 trials, these are 2 phase 2 studies. One is in newly diagnosed patients with a form of AML called secondary AML. They had MDS, myelodysplastic syndrome, that transformed into AML, or they had prior chemotherapy, let's say for breast cancer or for lymphoma, and then later on, they got AML because the drugs can also damage DNA. Those are newly diagnosed patients. We did a 121 patient randomized phase 2 trial comparing our drug, VYEOS or CPX-351, to the standard of care 7 and 3. in order to really substantiate that that wasn't just a fluke, that this is real, we, with the help of the funding, but through the funding of the LLS, were able to also do a second phase 2 trial. And what we saw was, again, in patients in first relapse now, they had a remission, but they relapsed. These patients typically don't do very well. And you can see here, again, we saw, these are survival curves, the number of proportion of patients still alive. And the first thing I'd like to point out, this is a devastating disease that we really have to make more progress on. Patients die very rapidly with disease. The life expectancy is very short. It grows very quickly. And what you can see is we made a large improvement in the survival. More patients were alive for longer with CPX-351 or VYEOS. We actually doubled the median survival time. And similarly, in the first relapse patients, these patients that typically do not do very well with the conventional treatments, we made a large improvement in their survival. The ability to do those side-by-side studies with the support, financial support of the LLS, convinced us and convinced the regulatory agencies that this looked very promising, and allowed us then to go into a phase 3 study to do that pivotal final study to determine whether this drug is really better or not. In the phase 2 studies, it looks promising. There's a large difference, but we needed to confirm that. And again, the LLS stepped up, LLSC stepped up again, and helped to fund the phase 3 study. That was a catalyst for us to be able to raise the tens of millions of dollars that's required to get these trials completed. Their funding upfront allowed us to go to other funding institutions and get matching money. It allowed us to get the study off the ground much sooner, and these are the results of the pivotal trial, the survival results. Again, this is the proportion of patients surviving on the conventional 7-3 treatment, and we have a large extension of survival with VYEOS or CPX-351. And importantly, we're seeing this, what we're hoping is a survival tail. So what we hope to be able to accomplish is not just that a few more people are getting to remission, they're living a few months longer, but that we're actually starting to make more patients cured of their disease. That's our goal. And I think what's really exciting first, before I get to the exciting point, it's also important that when you get treated for your disease, in this case with AML, that if you get a benefit in remission or survival, that it doesn't come at the cost of, sometimes to make things better for some patients, it's worse for others during the treatment phase, where that treatment becomes nasty, toxic, and can actually cause people to die. What we saw in our phase 3 trial was, that VYEOS, we had a 60-day mortality rate of only a little over 13% versus 21%, so a lot fewer people passing away early on during the treatment phase and then living longer. And what we're really excited about are the results here. This shows what happens to patients who are treated with either our drug VYEOS or the conventional treatment that's historically been used for the last 40 years that then went on to transplant. And what we're seeing is out to 2 years after transplant, we're seeing 67% of the patients, 2/3 of the patients are still alive, compared to essentially very few on the control arm. So we're really excited about these results, and I think this is the tip of the iceberg. We're going to find ways of using the drug better. We're going to find other populations of AML patients, other specific subtypes, that we're going to make a really big improvement. But there are a lot of patients that have, through the course of these trials, benefited from being treated with VYEOS, and a lot of that is because of the support that the LLS gave us when no one else would give us money, right? So we were able to do things right and get the studies done that needed to be done. So I think, as I said, that the last question in the prior presentation to address that, that the LLS does through the Therapy Acceleration Program is function as they have a clear role in establishing an area where they can make a large impact of their funding on the clinical trials, that they can do something that isn't going to necessarily get done or done as well without their support. Impact factor is important. So in our case, we were able to conduct 2 fairly large randomized phase 2 studies. We would have not been able to do that without the LLS support. The funding also propelled the product down a clear clinical development path towards registration. Very important. The LLS funding played a key role in our ability to attract other funds from other investment groups, private and public. The support of the phase 3 study really allowed us to get that study off the ground probably 6 months before we otherwise could have. And that meant patients who otherwise wouldn't have had access to VYEOS were able to participate in that trial and benefited, as you saw in the slides previously. And it's been a really tremendous partnership. We have been transparent. The LLS has been transparent. They have a very efficient review process. They make decisions. They move forward. They ensure they do not get in the way of progress. At the same time, we felt the responsibility to have realistic and executable goals and deliver on those goals on time and under budget. So this is a true partnership. It's not a grant. They're not handing us money. And in fact, it's a partnership in as much as there's a return on the investment. So if the drug is successful, which we will be filing for product approval in the next couple months in North America, and we fully expect and are optimistic that we will be successful and this drug will go on the market. And with that success will come a return to LLS. There's a multiple, so I am going to be really pleased to write that check out because I know that that money can now be used to support hopefully another program that can make a real difference. And I think it's a great organization that has a really excellent program that is self-sustaining, that I think is a great partnership and working together, using that funding to really extend now the basic research that looks promising and bring that along even more aggressively is a tremendous benefit that the LLS and LLS can provide for blood cancer patients.